You close a book midway through a chapter, step away, and find your thoughts drifting right back to the exact paragraph you left behind. In 1927, psychologist Bluma Zeigarnik proposed a formal explanation for this. She argued that human memory holds on to interrupted tasks more securely than completed ones. Early laboratory tests measured the recall ratio between finished tasks and those forced to be abandoned, setting a baseline for decades of psychological theory. A recent quantitative meta-analysis of nearly 40 studies tells a different story. The data shows the recall ratio between an open and closed task is practically identical, meaning the classical memory advantage is statistically non-existent. Memory retention cannot explain why a half-finished project continues to occupy our attention. The cognitive mechanism driving that obsession lies somewhere else entirely. While the memory effect fails under scrutiny, a parallel observation from 1928 holds up. The Ovsiankina effect describes a reliable behavioral drive to physically resume an interrupted action at the first opportunity, regardless of whether we actively remember the details. Modern cognitive research shows that simply writing down a concrete plan to finish a task later is enough to clear the mental intrusion of that task today, even though zero actual progress has been made. The psychological literature gives us a collection of behavioral quirks, but it lacks a unified mechanism to quantify this mental tension. To measure the invisible pull of an open loop, we need a more rigorous vocabulary. We have to step outside traditional psychology and apply the formal framework of the observer-dependent theory of everything, or ODTOE, which models human attention through the mechanics of physical systems. In this model, the mind is treated as a system constantly seeking cognitive equilibrium, driven by strict mathematical rules rather than vague emotional states. A learning task is not a binary checklist item. It is an ongoing mathematical iteration, repeatedly moving a learner's current state toward a verified target of objective mastery. Within the ODTOE framework, this state of total mastery acts as a fixed point. It is a stable anchor where the cognitive system finally comes to rest. When a task is interrupted, the system is forcibly dragged away from that central anchor. The physical distance between the current state and the fixed point generates a measurable structural tension. This tension activates what the model calls the coherence-restoration rate. It operates like a literal cognitive gravity, aggressively dragging the displaced system back toward the center at a steady, mathematically defined pace. The subjective feeling of needing to finish your work is simply this restoration rate executing its function. It is a guaranteed mechanical process restoring a disrupted system to equilibrium. This system works predictably for a single task, but we have to look at what happens to this cognitive gravity when a learner initiates several independent learning loops at the exact same time. The formal model defines total attention as a strictly limited resource. When multiple tasks are open, that attention undergoes multiplicative focus splitting, dividing the total available focus by the number of active loops. This graph shows the consequence of that division. As the number of concurrent tasks grows, the focus allocated to each individual loop is severely diluted, driving the aggregate pull of the system down toward zero. The data forms a non-monotonic curve with a single interior peak. This specific middle ground is where the aggregate tension is high enough to pull the mind forward without collapsing the per-task focus. Opening too many parallel tracks ensures that the restoration rate never gains enough traction to pull any individual task to completion. Because sustaining this structural tension requires energy, the brain naturally looks for shortcuts to dissipate the friction without actually finishing the required work. The ODTOE framework categorizes this shortcut as phantom closure. Writing a detailed schedule or checking a box on a list creates a temporary spike in declared confidence, signaling the system that the task is handled. That signal immediately discharges the psychological tension. The cognitive gravity evaporates, leaving the learner feeling a sense of relief despite having absorbed zero objective knowledge. The mental irritation of the open loop is cured, but the underlying neural architecture remains completely unchanged. If we want to build effective educational systems, the environment itself must be engineered to prevent this shortcut. The completion criteria for a topic must continually adapt to reject static pass or fail metrics. The alternative to the checklist shortcut is true retention. This occurs only when a learning loop is closed to active retrieval practice, requiring the learner to pull the information directly from memory without external cues. Active retrieval forces the system to align with the fixed point of objective mastery rather than declared confidence, stabilizing the underlying cognitive structure. Achieving long-term retention requires designing systems that discard easily gamed metrics and force the cognitive architecture to solidify through active reproduction of the material. By actively rejecting phantom closure and strictly limiting the number of parallel tasks we take on, we harness the friction of an unfinished task, turning a simple distraction into a relentless mechanical drive toward competence.